to this computer. Okay, we are now recording. We're on Facebook Live and we're everywhere. So this is the 7th Zoom session already of the school year. Thanks to everyone who has watched something so far, perhaps sent some feedback. This is the fun stuff. So Sarah and I, we actually had a little bit of a late change. If you had been very diligent about watching the schedule from the beginning of the year, originally this was going to be a football play-by-play Zoom session where we were going to talk about football. And then, a few weeks ago, we talked about setting up a broadcast and kind of planning out your broadcast. And a lot of the things I was going to say in the football one that I said in the previous one, I was also going to say today. So, and with so few football games left for you guys this year, we decided to go with interviewing tips and techniques that might be a little more beneficial.
O'Neill to the central office.
Sorry.
Call mute yourself. Come on. That's okay. It happens. So we wanted to do some interview tips, tricks, techniques. If you guys are creating videos and you've done some asking of questions to anybody, it might be a coach, it might be a teacher, it might be fellow students, whoever it is. We can always get better. I've done a whole lot of interviews, whether it was on the radio or with Striv stuff. Being a good person that does interviews, that conducts interviews, it just takes reps on reps on reps. There's no good way to say, here is the 5 things that you need to do, and if you do these things perfectly, you will be a great interviewer. You just have to do it an awful lot. So hopefully these tips you can kind of maybe conduct an interview and go back and say, did I do some of these things? Did I not? How could I do better at each of these? So here we go with the 5 things that I've got for you for the best interview you can have. The first one is to know what use your interview is going to be for. This goes a little bit along with the storyboard idea. A lot of you have already seen that we've got, where it's you've got to have the idea of what you're going to do. So that's part of it. And while about step 5 is what medium is it going to be? Is it going to be a written article or a blog post, or is it going to be a video or a podcast? You kind of sort of need to have a little bit of that in mind before you get even to the point where you're starting the interview process, where you're even starting to think about your questions. So I like to think of most of my interviews as being one of 3 different things. It can be a pregame interview, which is going to be used, and it might be used maybe the day before or even the week of, or it might be, part of the actual pregame show of the game that you're doing. So there's the pregame interview. There is the feature interview. That would be something that I'm doing a lot of this year with the Why I Coach podcast. If you guys have seen that, I'm interviewing coaches, and it's not at all about the team that they are coaching. It's all about them as a coach and their story. And so I think those are some important questions that can be asked. And I've gotten some great stories out of some coaches so far this year. That Colleen is on with us right now. Kevin Stein is one that we posted yesterday. Kevin's a great interview anyway, because you can ask him like one question. He can talk for 5-10 minutes on it sometimes. But there was a really great podcast. So that's kind of a feature. And then there's also the news story, which, if you watch your 6 o'clock news, that's what you're getting. Those types of stories are trying to ask a lot of questions to find out a lot of information. But what they are really trying to do, as far as if they are recording it, again, whether it's audio or video, they're recording it so that they can find that one. And Austin would correct me here. It's an actuality if it's on video. No, it's an actuality if it's audio. Unmute yourself, Sarah. Tell me, Austin. Go quick.
Soundbite is a quote in a video.
Soundbite is the quote with the video, and the actuality is the audio.
And then quote is print.
Quote is print. Okay, thank you. I see. You got to ask the kid that just recently graduated college and actually studied this. I just do it, right? So, but what you're trying to find then, if you're doing a news story, is you're trying to find that small section of this entire interview, but it's your story. You are telling the story, and these quotes or actualities or sound bites are highlighting important parts of the story. So to know your interview, like we said, the pregame, it's all about the game that is at hand. We're trying to find out more about the opponent that we're playing that night. How does your team measure up? What are the keys to the game? What would a win mean tonight? Would it mean that it's a homecoming game? We haven't won a homecoming game in 2 years, or we've won 5 straight homecomings, whatever it might be. It's a district game. It's a district title. A win tonight means big playoff points, whatever it might be. Every game means something. So what does it mean? With these types of interviews, these pregame or week of type interviews, you're probably not looking at 15 questions and hard hitting information stuff, right? You're looking for kind of the coach's thoughts on an update of the season, how things have gone so far, and hopefully how will they go in the next game. And I know this because I've interviewed so many of your coaches already. Your coaches know how to answer even not great questions. So the point of a pregame or even a postgame, it can be kind of the same thing. You're looking for a reaction and a thought on what just happened. You're not looking for something real long as far as your questions. You're not looking for a 30-minute interview. You're looking for 5-10 minutes maybe to just try to get through just to get the ideas from the coach. In a feature interview, you are trying to get them, the person you're interviewing, to tell you stories. This is, like I said, this goes exactly where I went with Why I Coach, that our podcast. It's a lot of, and I always actually start that in our little pre-interview talk with the coach, is that hopefully I ask a question that leads you to tell me the story of whatever. Tell me the story of what was it like growing up. Well, to go with this week's podcast, what was it like to grow up with Dick Stein, that has coached, as Kevin said, for 100 years. It was, it's a very sports-minded family. That's how he grew up. Scott Trimble grew up differently. Danielle Sievers grew up differently. I mean, so they're great stories. And what you are trying to do with a feature is you're trying to ask a question that is just open enough for them to tell you the story. So that when you go to edit in whatever way you are editing it, you are getting them to tell you the story. You watch our athlete spotlight videos, and it's the kids telling us the stories. That's what we're trying to get from. Is the kids to tell us the story. And that news story, then, like I said, the kind of the third type of interview is you are trying to get as much information out as you can. You're trying to get the who, what, where, how, when, why of a story, and you are going to tell us most of the story. You're going to tell us most of the information, even if it comes from the person that you're interviewing. You're the one telling the story, and then that soundbite or quote or actuality is going to highlight an important part of the story. So what you ask in those types of stories is very different. It is interesting, and I don't know if you guys will ever get if you as students get to this opportunity. I hope you do. That's kind of the point of what we're trying to do is to give you as many of these opportunities as you can. But if you have let's say Friday night for your team is a big football game. If you after the game are on the field, I guarantee you that after the coach speaks with the team and they have their little team huddle and then they break down or whatever. And everyone starts to scatter, I guarantee you the newspaper guys, and maybe if there's Striv TV or there's TV guys or radio people there, they will have those coaches surrounded really quick, and because they're trying to get interviews as best they can. And a newspaper is trying to get and would ask different questions than what TV would get or even radio. So if you kind of hang around there, you will actually hear the same question, but you'll hear it asked differently because of what each medium is trying to get. So I would really encourage that if you can, after your next football game, if you know there's any type of media there at all, whether it's even if it's just one newspaper guy, go down there and just listen to the questions that they're asking, and then especially listen to the responses that they're going to get from those questions, and you'll start to hear the difference in how those people are asking those questions. But I think that's that's really important and is a really good learning experience for you guys. Pop down on the field after a game, or volleyball. I don't want to leave volleyball or softball out by any means, but see what type of questions. And you get you want a live radio interview. That's going to happen at a different time than what the newspaper people want, or that the TV person will want. And sometimes, if you get, especially if you're in the metro area, you might have 3 or 4 TV stations there, right? Getting that interview. So it's fun to kind of be there and see how that all works after a game and to listen to those questions. Okay. Now we've got an idea of what type of interview that we're doing. So we've kind of been able to start to think about shaping our questions. Now we should be able to research our subject. You've got to have at least a little bit of background and some information and some things to talk about and to ask your interviewee about. My feature stuff with Why I Coach. I'm almost always go, tell us about your start growing up. When did softball or football or basketball, whatever it is, when did that become apparent to you that you wanted to play it or you wanted to maybe coach it? Who were some of your influences? Some of that you have to kind of have a little bit of research about beforehand. A little bit of research might just be, hey, I read an article in the newspaper about Coach this week, and he mentioned he has got there in the newspaper. There's one line about one thing that he did in high school. Well, that might spur a whole set of questions that didn't make it in the newspaper, but might make a fun podcast interview, even if it was only like a 5-minute interview. Hey, tell me, I read about this. What's the story behind it? Can you tell me more about it? And sometimes, like I said, your coaches, they'll give you a 5-minute answer on something that they made one passing comment on. And I'll come back to that idea in a little bit. So research your subject a little bit. You don't necessarily have to be exhaustive, but depending on what you're doing, what's your topic, your research might be, if it's a post-game interview, well, your research is probably in the game. Coach, that first quarter was a slow start, but the guys answered back really well. What was the turning point? Stuff like that. If you're doing a feature interview, like I said, you might have to do some looking back at some other articles or some other things that they've done and seeing, okay, what was something that they brought up that maybe didn't get discussed a lot more, didn't get mentioned anymore, but seems kind of interesting. Maybe why was it not brought up? That's something you can ask. Hey, I read about this. What's the story on it? And that's what you're trying to get at. So a little research can go a long way. It can kind of, again, help shape those questions. Biggest thing, it's my next tip as far as the 5 things to remember, is that when you're going through and you begin your process of writing out some questions, and I would definitely, if at all possible, would definitely write your questions out as best you can. But the questions that you write out, please do not let them be answered with a yes or a no or a 2-word answer. Those are not good questions unless you are knowing that you are going to immediately follow it up with why. And if you're going to follow it up with why, you might as well just say, tell me why you guys decided to go for it on 4th down with a minute left from your own 20, even though you were up. And, that's an answer. That will lead you to a good answer. Coach, somebody started tonight, didn't they? Yes, they did start tonight. That doesn't tell me anything. Why somebody started tonight? Because of why. Those are the types of questions that you want to get to. If you do get a very short answer, always be ready for a follow-up, like I said, and why is just about the greatest follow-up question ever, really. Okay, so now we kind of know what we're doing a little bit. We've researched our subject. We've written out our questions to a certain extent, or we've got our list of questions. Now you need to try to organize your thoughts as best you can before you go sit down for that interview. So to organize your questions, try to keep them, I like to anyway, try to keep them in somewhat of a chronological or natural story order. If I'm doing a pregame interview, I can almost always tell you that my first question is going to be about the previous game or the previous year, if this is the first game of the season. My next question is going to be about what you've worked on as a team in practice over the last few days. Were there any developments there? We really, sometimes you get an answer that is very X's and O's dominated. Sometimes you get an answer that is very mindset dominated. We just tried to really work on mentally focusing throughout the game, whatever it might be. But that would be fun. So we're talking about what the team has worked on this week, and then we're going to look at the strengths of the opponent that we're playing in that night's game or that week's game, whatever it might be. And then we're going to talk about the keys to the game. So they've got a great rushing attack. So what's the key to the game? Well, that coach, if I ask, that coach is going to tell me, well, we got to stop their running game. Boom. And trust me, those coaches, they will, if you do that in the right order, man, those coaches will just keep talking at you for a while, actually. So I could tell you that my pregame interviews would be almost exclusively like that. It might be 2 or 3 minutes. It might be 5 minutes, depending how long they talk and when we do it. And that might be all I'm looking for that particular interview. So when you go to organize your questions, try to give them somewhat of a natural flow. And then the biggest tip is the last, and I could have said it 5 times before this, and hopefully you've been doing it for the last 20 minutes, and that is how to listen to the answers of the questions that you're giving. It will quite often an answer will lead you to a follow-up question. I'll say this, if you listen to my Why I Coach podcast with, and I'll use this week's one with Coach Stein again, as an example, I had 7 questions that I had formulated before the interview that I knew for sure I wanted to ask Coach. And I had them pretty well phrased out, almost exactly how I wanted them to sound. In the process of listening to him talk through the answers to those, almost every question had a follow-up question. And so I sat down with 7 questions. I ended up asking somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 or 15 throughout the course of the interview. And because remember what an interview is a conversation. You are just talking to someone and you're asking them to tell you a story, or you're asking them to give you information. And so you can definitely tell when someone is really uncomfortable with asking a question, when all they need to do is just stand there and say, "Hey, Coach, can you tell me about the game tonight? Coach, I saw that so-and-so played really well tonight. What are your thoughts on that?" You're just talking to someone, which is something that hopefully we are all doing quite often throughout the days. And so those are my 5 tips. There are a couple of links I think that I gave to Sarah that are going to be in the post, and I'll let Sarah maybe jump in here quick, and they are in the post themselves. Actually, you can unmute quick. Yeah.
So I was going to wait till you were finished with your Zoom, but on the post in your school dashboard, there will be 2 different YouTube links that Eric shared with me, and then I will probably also upload them to Facebook and Slack. So
yes.
You can access them.
Yep. One of them is a Forbes article from Forbes.com, and it gets a little more specific. It has a lot of this stuff in it. But it does get a little more specific as far as writing questions and whatnot. And then another one is from Scholastic, actually, and it's great for student reporters. What are you trying to get out of? So they've got a few more steps. I think that Forbes one is actually like 3 pages long, but it's a lot of good information in there. And you can you'll kind of see, if you watch this and then you go back and you look at those links, you can kind of hopefully see some correlations there. So that's what we're going with. So that's what I've got as far as my topics and my talk for this week. The project and the challenge, if you're ready, is to do an interview. It might be with a student. It might be with a teacher. It might be with a coach. Like I said, I know that almost every school has at least 5 really good coaches that will give you a really good interview. If you time it right, don't make it a hurried interview. and you are well prepared and and ready to go with this, then I promise you your coaches will be more than happy to give you some great answers. And then you've got to figure out what you want to do with it. And if Austin is still in the room there with Sarah, he might be able to speak to this a little bit. There are times when we've had kind of an idea of what we wanted to do as far as getting B-roll for something. Oh, we definitely wanted to get so-and-so doing this or doing this. And then in the process of doing an interview, we discovered, hey, we should try to get something else like this. And Austin, we did this a little bit with Sarah up at Twin River, right? It was after the interview, and it was like, wow, we need to try to get so-and-so, or we not, try to get these type of clips or get this kind of footage or whatever. And it kind of goes to that listening to your interview, right?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, depending on what they say could totally change the course of, if you're making a video, it could change the course of the video, or if you're just doing audio. Like you said with Coach Stein, your follow-up questions could be totally different than what you expected because they said one little thing, and you should pay attention to those.
Yep. So there's lots of ways to get good ideas for interviews. So do your interview, put it in Slack for a review. And like I said, you want to try to put a final interview in there? That'd be cool. If you want to just do a raw interview, hey, I've got an audio file that I did with my coach. Do you want to take a listen to it? I'd be happy to. Not listening necessarily to what the coach's answers are, although I will. I'd be more listening to your questions as an interviewer. And the biggest thing is, as much as you can, make it conversational. Again, you're sitting there and you're having a conversation with a person, and you're recording it. So that's all part of it. And we'd love to see some of these projects. So, Sarah, do you have anything else? Or Austin, by the way?
Not.
Is there anything else that we need to mention? We've had, I guess, just as we've done this, I want to say a big shout out to York and to Keely Reinert, the teacher, and the students. Our Slack is blowing up just like we wanted it to this year. So 2 thumbs up for you guys that have used that, and great feedback. Marcus Shears at Johnson County Central, and Marcus is sometimes he's given quicker feedback than even what Taylor or Austin or Sarah I can. That's the point of Slack, though, is to make that a big network for all you guys. So if you get in there to a channel, throw something in there. If you see something else from somebody, comment, share ideas. That's exactly what Slack is for, and it's come a long way. And Sarah's done a good job helping us promote that. Which, if I'm not mistaken, Sarah, are you not doing a Zoom on Slack here pretty soon?
Next week.
Look at that.
Great plug.
I thought so.
Hey, you guys, does York have a class dedicated to Striv? Or does she incorporate that in another class?
It's her media production, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Taylor just ran in the other.
Production. Yep.
Oh, you are. York, it's not a Striv specific, but it's media production, right? Yeah, media production is what they called it. Yep.
Okay. I wish I had a class dedicated to Striv, because I don't. I incorporate it in my digital media class, but I mean, I don't know. I just wish I did, and I don't.
So what are some of the things that you do that you would like, or that what would be, if you could wrap it into Striv better? What would you do?
Well, I would spend a lot more time creating graphics, for one thing, and doing some of these pregame interviews, doing some stuff like that to share on our Striv broadcast. I'm tempted to ask just maybe 3 or 4 kids in my digital media 2 class if they would be interested in just focusing on Striv. I don't know. I've been thinking about that. I think I'm going to ask, and if I can get the interest even with 3 kids, because that's kind of a class they can do what they want, projects that they want, but I just feel we could do so much more if I had that.
And Rob Goff at Kearney has 2 sections of media production, and they do a lot of stuff that is not necessarily directly into like a Striv broadcast. They're doing a lot of, they've got a broadcaster that's really into it. Jeff Ekstrom is doing some good stuff with his play-by-play, and then he's just going on the field after a game and interviewing coach and a player or two, and it's just on Twitter. It's not part of, necessarily part of the stream, and so it's kind of building Jeff's personal brand. And that's the other thing for your students is that the Strive stuff is awesome and it's great, but if they're kind of clipping some of their stuff or sharing it also on their own accounts, then they're kind of building their own personal brand. And
Right.
As they get into college and they get into workforce, your resume right now is your Twitter feed, it's your Facebook page, and stuff like that. So, definitely good to share some of that, or just do it directly on their own Twitter accounts. And then you can have the Northwest Vikings account that retweets that. That's what Carney's doing right now, actually.
Okay.
So
Sounds good.
And if we need to talk to an administrator, we'll send Taylor over there and say, hey, Strive needs to do more stuff.
Yeah, and we can help too, like with Slack. That's what we do with York, and we're doing that with Milford and Wood River. They post some things, and we've been assisting them. So you can always email me, and if there's a few students that you would like me to work with specifically for Strive things, I would love to help out.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
See if I can get some interests going in my DM2 class. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we would love to. And that's kind of my role. So
Good.
Yeah.
I think Taylor's coming out here tomorrow. I don't know if anybody's joining him, but.
Yep. I think that one's just Taylor tomorrow.
Okay.
But he was on the phone with Heather for a long time this morning, I know.
Good.
But yeah. Gail, do you guys have any questions on any project stuff or anything?
Except Gail's not here. I'm Audrey.
Oh, Audrey. Well, it comes up as Gail down there.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's
Audrey, sorry. Questions, thoughts, anything? Sorry, I'm looking over here, but my camera's here, so.
Not right now.
Okay.
Audrey, where are you at?
We're in Fall City.
Oh, Falls City. Okay.
Corner to corner with Strive,
yeah.
My first year doing it, so I'm learning a lot. that
Awesome.
Some of the kids know more than I do. They've been in it.
There it goes.
Sometimes. I finally learned last night how to do have you seen the augmented reality in Snapchat?
I haven't.
Where you can tap on your screen, and if you have a Bitmoji, it will bring in your Bitmoji, and your Bitmoji will do something. Like one of them that I was playing with last night was my Bitmoji was grilling, and he was moving his burger back and forth on the grill, and then he puts lighter fluid on it and it blows himself up. But you can pin that into whatever, like I was doing it in my kitchen, and I pinned him in there. Yes. And then all of a sudden he blew up and he was on my counter, and I could walk around him in 360, and it was pretty amazing. It was really, really cool, actually. So what can we do? What can we do that with Strive? I have no idea, but yeah, we definitely can do something. So, and I had to learn that from a kid. I couldn't figure out how to do it. I'd seen it on some other people's, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So a kid actually had to show me.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. That's all I got. So I'll click Facebook off, and I'll stop my recording here.